NFL season is right around the corner, and that means Detroit Lions football. And we have a first-time guest on today, Nolan Bianchi of the Detroit News, who is somebody that I've interacted with. We have a bunch of mutual friends, but we've never actually talked, and he's obviously never been on the show. So really looking forward to picking his brain. He's been on the beat for a few years now as the Lions get closer to kicking off their season. A lot of question marks, but also a lot of hype coming into this campaign as they do return a heavy majority of the team that went 15-2 a year ago. But you are replacing both of your coordinators. You do have some injury issues. You have a very difficult road schedule. I'm going to ask him all about that. Really looking forward to it. But before we get to our interview, let's get the show notes out of the way. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. I am on TikTok as well. That is growing. We're trying to get to 10K by the end of the year. Looks like we're on pace to do that, which is great. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you want to find this podcast in audio form, we're available on Spotify. We are available on Apple Podcasts. And of course, CastellaniContent.com is being updated every single day with the content that Austin and I create, whether it's Tiger videos, I'll say this episodes, Chris and Company episodes, everything that you need is archived. And we've been at that. We've had that website there for a minute now. So we're coming up on a pretty large sample size of content of stuff from the last year plus that you can go back and find if you are so inclined to do so. All right. Almost record time. Ready for a first-time guest as we break down what the 2025 season is going to look like for the Detroit Lions. Let's get to our interview with Nolan Bianchi. Nolan Bianchi of the Detroit News joins us, first-time guest as the Lions inch ever so closer to kicking off their season, and they're going to kind of be thrown into the fire right away with this pretty intense schedule, which we will talk about. But first off, Nolan, first time we've talked face-to-face. Nice to finally chat up. How are you doing? How are things going so far on the Lions beat?
Yeah, two locked on alums over here. Red Wings, Tigers. Some of the we got to start it in the market a little bit. But yeah, no, the Lions camp has been going really well. I think the defense so far has outperformed the offense, which has led to some questions about maybe the offense and their success under or post Ben Johnson era. But I think for the most part, what we've learned from Lions training camp so far is that the defense is just really good, and the offense should be pretty good too. But, I think we learned a lot last week with the Miami Dolphins coming in for joint practices. And then this upcoming week, the Houston Texans will be here for a day as well. So those are kind of where you really start to learn, or get some extra context on maybe the performances of the two units. And I think we all came away from last week going, oh, well, the defense is just really good. That's why it's winning every day in practice. So that's kind of where things stand right now. But other than that, it's just a lot of camp battles.
Yeah, we'll talk about both units here, but I do actually want to start with that. I'm going to call infamous joint practice between them and the Dolphins, because this is the first time that I can remember in which I have seen multiple media members, not just in Detroit, but nationally, point out what was, based on whatever, just a complete beatdown in this joint practice between these two teams. I'm just curious to know, because, at this point of the year, I would expect, that there's intensity and you see fights and stuff like that, but the general takeaway was this was like a preseason college game where you would just have, Michigan or one of the Big Ten schools going up against a weaker opponent. What happened in this joint practice that led to the Lions looking so dominant?
Well, from an offensive standpoint, the Dolphins don't really have any good cornerbacks, and that was really where the Lions were feasting. Amon-Ra St. Brown had about as dominant of a day of practice as I've ever seen in my 4 years of doing this. He was catching absolutely everything. It started in one-on-ones. He was making guys look absolutely silly. Jack Jones is a good veteran cornerback from Miami, but he didn't look like it on that day. And, it just kind of was one of those things where everything was clicking. They also got Taylor Decker back, which was huge. That was something that I think we all figured was going to be a big problem if he wasn't going to be able to get back here in time. But through the first, call it 3-4 weeks of training camp, he wasn't out there. And the guys that they were rolling out there to play on the first team and line up against Aiden Hutchinson and Marcus Davenport are just not guys who are equipped to handle that situation. And so that, I think, disrupted a lot of things. So the tandem of the Lions offense still being pretty good, as well as getting back that stalwart left tackle who is going to be able to actually face Aiden Hutchinson and give him a little more of a problem than, say, a Dan Skipper, a Giovanni Manu, or Jamarco Jones. I think that went a long way as well. So I think that was a big part of it. And then defensively, they didn't have Tyreek Hill. Jalen Waddle was limited, but I just think this is a really good defense at all three levels. The pass rush looked really solid. The interior of DJ Reader and the new rookie that they got, Tyleek Williams, looked really good. Their secondary, when fully healthy, looks unbelievable. DJ Reed has been an excellent addition, and Taron Arnold, he was a guy who caught a lot of flack last year because maybe I had some bumps in the road, but he was playing a lot of man coverage in year one, and really. When I say a lot of man coverage, he was playing more man coverage snaps than any player in the NFL, which is extremely hard to do for anybody, let alone as a rookie. And I think he just kind of trial by fire and really internalized all of that and used it to get better. And so far through this training camp, you're seeing that. So on all three levels of the defense, it's looking really good. And then offensively, I think they just need to get Taylor Decker back, and now things are flowing a little bit better. Again, the timing matches up. It's a timing-based offense, and when you don't have that because your left tackle is getting beat by Hutch, it's going to be a long day.
Yeah, and I think people forget, and I understand the life of a football player is kind of short when it comes to their career, but this is a relatively young defense. I mean, you have guys in their third, fourth years. I mean, even Hutch, who's by, the standards of this team considered a veteran, fourth season. We're not talking 10-year NFL vets. I mean, Kirby's in his fourth year. Branch, I think, is in his third or fourth year. So, I mean, you got guys who are still growing up, still coming into their own, and I think that unit will take a step forward. You talked about the receivers, and you talked about Amon-Ra, and that kind of is a nice segue into, I would say, the guy that offensively up to this point has probably been the breakout star of the preseason, which is Isaac TeSlaa. And, you talk about an offense that has a few question marks. Obviously, you lose some key pieces on the offensive line. You lose your offensive coordinator. But as a whole, I don't think that there's that many offenses in football with as many weapons as what Morton's going to have as the offensive coordinator for the Lions this year. What is it that stood out about Isaac TeSlaa, and how do you see him being used in this brand new offense?
Yeah, real quick, I think that's an important thing to know. And as well as anybody covering the Tigers and watching them day in and day out, development is not always linear, right? But so far, for a lot of these players, it kind of has been. And so when you look at the offensive situation that they're in coming into this year, where, you lose Kevin Zeitler, you lose Frank Ragnow. That was a big one. Yes. You lose Ben Johnson. But I was still looking around going, these guys all should be at a point in their career where they're going to get better. And I think that is kind of illustrating maybe the confidence that I have in them going into the season. But to get back to TeSlaa, I would like to see him repping a little bit more with the ones, because that's something that he hasn't really done. And I think when he came into camp and, when the offseason started, there was this thought that he was going to be kind of log jammed up a little bit behind Tim Patrick, veteran receiver who they brought in after training camp ended last year. He had a pretty decently good season, something in the neighborhood of, 394 yards, 3 touchdowns. It was just generally a reliable outside player who could go get you a catch when you needed it. And I think there was an expectation that it was like, okay, does he overtake, he being TeSlaa, does he overtake Tim Patrick at the middle of the year, at the end of the year? Like, is it one of those things where he kind of just is more or less redshirting in his rookie season? But I think what we've seen from him through camp so far is that he has a lot of the tools to where you can kind of just put him out there and see what happens. I mean, that throw from Kyle Allen the other night, it was not a great route, but Kyle Allen trusted him, threw it to him anyways, and he went up and got it. And that's the second time in preseason that we've seen him make that kind of catch. So he kind of seems like a guy who's just going to be able to get in there and make plays if given the opportunity. That being said, Tim Patrick came back today. We'll see where he's at in his readiness for the season, because even before he got hurt, he wasn't looking all that hot. And then, like I said, the only thing that's like tempering my expectations for TeSlaa in this rookie year is the fact that he really hasn't gotten a lot of opportunities with the first team. And I'm not necessarily sure why that is. I understand that you want to give reps to all your guys who you know for sure are going to be out there, guys like St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Khalif Raymond, but I still think that it would behoove them to maybe get him on the same page with Jared Goff, and then you can start to do something with him where, he might not be a fantastic separator in year one, but he's going to be able to win jump balls, and I think that that's a valuable asset that they really haven't had over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I think it's similar. I'm not saying he's going to be this good, but I remember similar questions being asked a few years back about the rookie version of Jahmyr Gibbs when he was going to be kind of unleashed, and you saw him in bits and pieces in the first half of the season, but it was that Raiders game on Monday night where he really kind of came alive. Again, not saying that Tesla's going to become the dynamic playmaker that Gibbs has been, but I think that the coaching staff, generally speaking, does a good job of kind of easing these guys into these roles, and this is something I talked about on my other show earlier this week, which is that assuming that a Tesla ends up becoming a piece here, I think that Brad Holmes' ability in the draft to take chances on skill position players that pay off has been almost immaculate. And I know that in some instances they're first round picks, but I brought up people really criticized the Jahmyr pick at the time. And you had Amon-Ra falling to the fourth round, and you now have somebody like Tesla, and those are most likely going to be key pieces of this offense, not just this year, but going forward. And I know he's done a tremendous job building through the trenches as well, but what do you think it is about Brad Holmes as a GM that makes him such a good indicator of kind of those middle round draft picks and turning them into explosive playmakers?
Well, I think they look for, the intangibles, the traits, like, does this guy love football? And that's obviously a thing that, you do have to wonder about with some guys when they come into the league, perhaps a little bit surprisingly. But I think, if we just take Tesla, for example, or we take Amon-Ra St. Brown, or even Jameson Williams, all three of those guys, they have some sort of like real intriguing wide receiver abilities to them. Tesla's being that he has the size, he has the athleticism, but that's not the end of the road. They have to have that paired with a willingness to block, the eagerness to go and dig out a safety on the second level, even if the run might already be by or whatever, it seems like I've hypothesized for years that they, when it comes to the draft, have a smaller bucket of draftable players than most teams, because they are just like the things that they look for in intangibles are non-negotiables. And I almost wonder if like that's their starting point versus the actual like football ability prospect stuff. So I think that honestly is probably the biggest thing, is they find guys that fit them. And I remember I was listening to an interview a long time ago. It was Kyle Van Noy, and he was talking about when he got drafted by the Lions, and he showed up and they're like, yeah, we don't really know what we're going to do with you yet, but you're a heck of a player. And the unknown about what they were going to do with him was like, they just didn't know. Like, it wasn't like a good thing. They didn't have all these ideas in their heads of like, oh, we could do this and this. Like, it was just like, we're not really sure. And those days are over. Like they when they go out, I think they have visions for a player when they draft him. They know exactly what he's about, and that's just as important as knowing what he can do.
I also think, and this was my theory, is that I think the wide receiver position is the position, at least a skill position, where you are most likely to find diamonds in the rough, because I think it's the position in college where you have the most that is out of your control. If you just have bad quarterback play or a guy that can't get you the ball, like, you can have all the intangibles in the world, you might fall in the draft. I mean, the example I use, and it was my team, but I just got to say it, Nico Collins was excellent at Michigan, and I knew this guy was a good receiver. The scheme, coaching, quarterback play, whatever you want to call it, just did not allow him to get the touches that he probably could have, which would have allowed him to probably be a first, second round pick. He ends up falling to the Texans. He's a top 10 receiver in football at this point. I think somebody like Amon-Ra, you can make a similar comp to, though not quite the size of Nico Collins. So I think that they've, like you said, I think identifying the intangibles has been huge for them. Another question about the offense here, because so much has been, I can't remember the last time really in the NFL that the loss of a coordinator was this publicized really for any team. I feel like it's kind of become this soap opera. And a big part of it is in division. He goes to Chicago, but the page has been turned. John Morton comes in here, and it's both a great situation to inherit, but also a poor situation in the sense that many people are looking for regression, because you had an offense that at its peak over the last 2 years was just firing on all cylinders. I mean, the run game was going, it was complementary football. It was trick plays that were fun. I mean, it was Ben Johnson drawing things up in the sand, and very often they were working. And so you have a new OC who comes in here. How much of this scheme do you think is going to be a change compared to what we've seen over the last few years? And how much of it do you see being a, if it ain't broke, don't fix it type of thing, where you don't want to change too much of what Ben Johnson laid out because so much of it was successful?
Yeah, to your point, the first point you made about Ben Johnson, I completely agree with you. And just in terms of like this team is going to totally fall apart. But I think part of that is like because of the fact that he was coveted for so long, and like it worked out for him of like, yeah, he was able to keep coming back and then still being the hottest candidate on the market, like entering each offseason. So I think that kind of that long standing will they, won't they type of thing with him has led people to maybe overstate, I guess, his overall importance to the, let's just call it the 15 wins that they had last year. But I think for the most part, what we're going to see and what we have seen from John Morton over these last couple of weeks is that a lot of stuff is going to stay the same. This is still a timing based offense that is going to use the run to open up the pass and let Goff kind of have the full playbook at his disposal at all times. But I think one thing that was really interesting was when Jared Goff started to have success in this offense under Ben Johnson. It was because, in part, they designed it around what he wanted to do. And they said, what do you like? What makes you feel comfortable? All this type of stuff. And he helped design that offense back in 2022. That was also the year that John Morton was here as like a senior offensive analyst. So it was Morton, it was Campbell, it was Ben Johnson, it was Jared Goff, all kind of pouring into what is this going to look like. And three or four of those guys are still here. So I think that's kind of really important. And then, it's something that stuck out to me when we were talking to the quarterbacks coach, Mark Brunell, towards the end of the spring, where he was basically saying, we're not changing much because we're going by what Jared likes. And I think Jared sees the game extremely well. Like, I think better than most quarterbacks. I think he might take knocks sometimes because of his physicality or, his lack of mobility or, whatever it may be. But I think when it comes to truly playing quarterback, like, I'm walking to the line, I'm seeing what the defense gives me, I'm making the right check, I'm getting to the right play, and I'm making the right decision. I think there are few, if any, quarterbacks in this entire league who do it as well as he does. And so when you have that, you have that you have the mental makeup that's necessary, and you're continuing to emphasize seeing the game through his eyes. I think that's just gonna, there might be some bumps in the road early on in the season. They're just how these things go. Even when Ben Johnson was coming back, they got off to a little bit of a slow start offensively last year. But in the end, once we see him in weeks 7 through 10 or whatever it might be, I expect them to be full flight and kind of the same as they always been.
Yeah, and that's a great point you bring up about Goff, and not to be too like old man yells at a cloud here, but I do think that's a dying art with quarterbacks. I think that there's so much focus on the intangibles now, and there's so much focus on drafting athletes as opposed to quarterbacks. Now, look, I mean, the mobility issue is a problem with Goff. Now, they've made up for it by giving him almost as good an offensive line as you can have over the last several years. But when you watch your average football game, I mean, the 50-yard deep ball you see maybe twice, maybe.
Yeah.
Like it's when you go back and watch Tom Brady's career, I mean, people want to criticize him for the dinking and dunking. It's like, yeah, well, sometimes it's there. So, the goal is to get first downs. It's to move down the field. And then, every so often he'd pop one off. But I think that as a whole, Goff has done a very consistent job of not forcing things. Sans maybe the Houston game last year, which they still found a way to win. So I think offensively they're in a good place. Going back to the coordinator thing here for a second, just because this is something that I've gotten a lot of comments about it, and I think that it shows how not used to success Lions fans are. Do you lend any credence to the theory that Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn were something of a distraction before the divisional round last year. They were being courted by other teams, and thus it's one of the reasons why they kind of fell apart against Washington.
No, not really. And I mean, like, it's just what comes with this. You're 100% right. It's like this just comes with the territory of being a good team. But when's the last time that happened? Like
Right.
they never seemed to bother the Patriots when they were going through that pretty much on a yearly basis, and guys interviewing for this, that, or the other thing. And if you're a good team and just I don't know, whatever you want. When I look back at that game, they still scored 31 points. Did they stop running the ball with Jahmyr Gibbs? Yes, of course. But I think part of that was them going, okay, we're down by 10. We made one mistake, maybe two mistakes, call it two mistakes. The Goff got strip sacked when they were, and then he threw the pick six, and that was kind of a 10-point difference there.
Yeah.
But once you get to that point, you're going, okay, well, we don't really expect our defense to get a lot of stops today because they've got guys out there who have been signed, 3-4 weeks ago. Maurice Norris, I hate to bring him up in this context after what just happened, but he didn't play a game like all season. Then all of a sudden, it's just like he's out there at safety. Amik Robertson, who was your heart and soul of that win over the Minnesota Vikings just 2 weeks prior, breaks his arm on like the second play from scrimmage,
and it's just play of the game.
And so like, I think they just realized what the situation was, and it was kind of like the onside kick that they did with like 15 minutes left in the Bills game, where it was just like, we just recognized what the deal was, and we just thought, let's just go keep scoring because we just need something to break our way, but they needed a lot of time for that to happen because it was unlikely that it was just going to happen on any given drive. So let's give ourselves, we think that we can match with these guys, go toe-to-toe offensively, and it's all going to be about, hey, can we get one or two turnovers in that span that's able to actually swing the momentum and allow them to take the lead by the end of the game. So no, I don't really buy that. I think the defense of performance that we saw from them in that game was honestly to be expected based on everything we've seen from them with the injuries and stuff like that. And then to the stuff with maybe Gibbs not running it as much as he should. And then the J-Mo pass, like J-Mo shouldn't have thrown that ball. That was on J-Mo. I don't really criticize Ben Johnson for that. So I don't know. I'll probably take some heat for that, but I'm selling that idea.
Well, no, I'm with you because, and again, it speaks back to what we were just talking about because I'm a diehard Michigan football fan, and it's like there's, especially during the prime of the Harbaugh years, or even going back to the prime of the Lloyd Carr years, like you hire good coordinators, you lose good coordinators. This is how things work in this league. Like in a lot of ways, it's a testament to what they've done. The only time, and I mean, I'm talking I've been alive for 30 years that I can remember, in which there was legitimate hype prior to this for Alliance coordinator was Terrell Austin. Well,
Terrell Austin, yeah,
was the 2014 defense, and even he fizzled out. So it's like, it's kind of to be expected. It was a combination of factors. They didn't play a very good game. They made too many mistakes. It is also worth pointing out, and it's not going to make Lions fans feel any better, but in a lot of ways, the Commanders offensively beat Detroit at their own game, which was taking risks, going for it on every single fourth down and converting it, getting big plays on third down. And that's obviously the injuries are a huge part of that. And I want to go back to that right now because it feels like, sadly, in a lot of ways, while it's not quite the volume of injuries we had last year, because that was historic, there's, the injury issues kind of carry over with this team again here in 2025. You have guys like Hutch who are coming back, but you just brought up Tim Patrick just now coming back. You've had some, guys that are going to be missing some time. And this is the hard part to me because the one thing, and I've had to deal with this with the Tigers, the one thing I'm never going to do is like point out, though maybe they don't have a good like strength and conditioning coach. Like I'm not going to
Tigers aren't hitting, got to fire the hitting coach.
It's like I'm not going to sit here as a dope with no medical degree trying to assess like how these guys are getting injured or why. Football is a rough game. You have a lot of bad luck. At the same time, as I brought up, historically banged up towards the end of last season, especially the defense. I mean, you got to a point where you're literally signing guys who are free agents just to fill roles as starters for you in the playoffs. Is there any explanation behind the sheer number of injuries with this organization, or is it just that's football, that's just bad luck?
Yeah, I asked Rod Wood about that at owners' meetings a couple months ago, and he basically was like, "We've done studies. It's not the turf. It's just we play a violent style of
Yeah.
defense, and these things are going to tend to happen. You're going to lose a couple guys along the way." I will say about like because I've seen obviously the stuff about the training staff and whatever, and I think it's fair to wonder those things. But what I will say about Campbell is that year one, he brought in Anthony Lynn to be his offensive coordinator. Didn't work. Fired him
Correct.
by what, week 11?
Just halfway through the season. Yeah, I know.
The very next year, team starts 1-6, and the defensive backs were absolutely killing this team. Fire the defensive backs coach. So I don't think, like, based on everything we've seen, like Dan Campbell is a guy who, even if he doesn't seem like it, I think is ruthless. And it is his responsibility to do what needs to be done, and I think he takes that very personally. And I think that supersedes maybe any other feelings that he might have about this staff member or that staff member or whatever. And so I think, maybe this is too simplistic of a way to understand it, but I think if there was something to the idea that it was the athletic training staff or whatever that was contributing to this, something would have been done about it.
Yeah, and it's the injury. There's so much variance to the injury. It's not like a baseball. It's not like a baseball team where if you have 7-8 guys in your starting staff that all get Tommy John, you could probably point to the development of your pitching and be like, okay, there might be an issue here, but it's shoulder here, arm here, pec here. It's just
broken jaw for Carlton Davis, broken arm for Amik Robertson.
Right.
Alex Anzalone got concussed by his own teammate in week 3 and had to miss a game. Marcus Davenport just get like chop of his life on his tricep exploded in week 3. Like, just that sucks. But that's football, I understand the frustration, but it's like, man, that's playing a brutal game. And the year before that too, I think what's really interesting, people kind of forgotten it. I think the year before that, they were arguably the healthiest team in the playoffs. Like, they were missing CJ Gardner-Johnson, who came back at the end of the year. They were missing James Houston, who suffered a broken ankle while on kickoff return or on kickoff coverage earlier in the year. But like, outside of that, those are the guys that they started the season with. And so, we'll see how it goes. To your point, they have already lost quite a few guys with injuries. Ahmed Hassanin sounds like he's going to be out for considerable time, if not the entire season. So, but again, just kind of a freak pec injury where he's swimming a guy and then another guy just gets right, perfect spot, boom. It just happens that fast. And it's hard to really assign blame.
Yeah, and that's a good point you mentioned about Campbell as well, because I remember during that 1-6 stretch, and you brought up the secondary getting torched. He gets rid of the secondary coach, but there was a year and a half of is Aaron Glenn going to stick around or not? And he stuck by him the entire time, and ultimately now head coach in the NFL. I think, well, you're going to make mistakes in this game, and you're going to make mistakes with coordinator hires. I think generally speaking, he's had a pretty good feel for when something's working out or going to work out versus when it doesn't. Want to discuss the defense a little bit now, as you brought up. I mean, even with some of the injuries, this is a defense that returns a ton of studs. And of course, the first kind of domino that fell in regard to the injury bug last year was, Aiden Hutchinson missing basically, a heavy majority of the season during a stretch in which it looked like he was at least going to be top 3 for defensive player of the year.
Yeah.
Just having a game wrecking season. My concern level with Hutchinson is very low. I know I'm going back to Michigan. The guy's motor is just insane. I think that he'll ultimately be fine. If there's an injury beyond this, it might feel different, but the guy's an animal. What does concern me isn't so much Hutchinson. It is the fact, and this is an issue that has existed, I feel like, for a couple of years. Is there somebody else on the D-line that can complement him as an edge rusher? And I think that last year, they made a move to get Zadarius Smith, but of course they weren't able to be on the field at the same time because Hutch was injured. He's still out there, and I think that there is kind of there's some gamesmanship here of like, let's wait till week 5 or 6. He's a veteran player, maybe even after that. Okay, we'll bring him on for the home stretch type of thing, and which I'd be fine with. But that kind of leads to my question, which is the guy who's going to complement Hutch and be consistent as an edge rusher. Is he currently on the Lions roster right now, or do you think they'll go elsewhere at some point during the season?
Well, so It's tough to answer those questions at once because I do still think that there's a very high chance that Zadarius Smith ends up back on this team. I don't know when it'll be,
Yeah.
but like Brad Holmes even alluded to it, and he was like, "Yeah, we remain in touch, all this stuff." And I don't want to say that he's trying to miss training camp, but I think he's of the position that he's 33 years old or whatever he is. If he has to miss training camp, he'll be fine. And so I do wonder if like he's not really all that motivated to get back here right away and kind of go through all this. But then currently, I think the answer is yes. And it's Marcus Davenport. However, the thing is with him, is it just a matter of can he stay healthy? And he's had a really, really unfortunate run of injury luck. It's been an ankle, it's been a tricep. And I just think when you have 2 years of that, people just kind of forget about you, or they're unwilling to maybe even take your availability into consideration. And I certainly understand why people are apprehensive about that being the quote unquote solution to having an edge rusher opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. But I do think that if he can be healthy, he will be exactly what they need because, Hutchinson's a speed guy. He's got all these different athletic traits. Marcus Davenport's just going to bull rush you, crush the pocket, and then Hutch is going to leave you with no room to go on the other side. And that's just like they are actually a perfect complement to each other, I think. But I do still think, I think they're going to put out, feelers for Zadarius Smith. I think it would be wise, considering how difficult it is to just go get one of those guys in the middle of the season. Right. To go get that guy right now. Like you're in a Super Bowl window. I understand maybe you're trying to, see how it goes. But like at the end of the day, go win a Super Bowl. Like go get the guy. You'd rather go get him now than have an injury to maybe it's not even Hutch. Maybe it's just Davenport, or maybe it's the guy behind Davenport, and then Davenport has to miss a few games, and all of a sudden you're on edge 4 working with Aiden Hutchinson. That's not a situation that you want either. So I think they should go out and get him. And it's just, to me, it's just a matter of when honestly, if I was a betting man, I would say there's a higher than a 50% chance he ends up back in a Lions uniform. And Hutchinson, just real quick, like he looks as good as he's ever looked. Like he looks phenomenal. I agree with everything you said about him being the kind of guy who can make it back from something like this because of work ethic. And then on top of that, just the nature of the injury that he suffered. Even if he wasn't Aiden Hutchinson and doing all this stuff to get back, like I still think that there's a pretty high degree of confidence that he will, that a player with that type of injury would return looking like the same guy for the most part.
Yeah, and this is the same guy who people, I think, forget about this because that year was so wonky, but missed almost the entire COVID year at Michigan and came back the next season and, finished runner-up for the Heisman. I mean, this is not his first rodeo in terms of coming back from injury. And, you bring up the Super Bowl window. And I think that this year, for whatever reason, I think that there's more question marks than there were the last few seasons, I think in large part because you lose the coordinators. But when I look at this team, I don't really see a definitive weakness. My biggest issue, honestly, is that I don't know if I've ever seen a tougher road schedule in the NFL than this one. I mean, I would argue the schedule as a whole is pretty brutal. I'm not going to act like there's a lot of cakewalks at home, but I mean, this has to be one of the toughest road schedules that I've seen in a long time. I mean, they get thrown into the fire right away, starting out of 425 game against the Packers on in Lambeau Field on a Sunday. I guess it's one of those things that the fans prognosticate and break down more than the players do. There's more of a day-to-day thing. But if you could just a little bit talk about how brutal this schedule is for this team, do you feel like it's something that on a week-to-week basis you feel like could impact them a little bit psychologically, or do you feel like they're going to continue to embrace challenges and roll on with it?
I was going to say, if anything, like I think they love it. Like I really do. And that's something that I think it's really easy to say that, right? Oh, we love it. Bring us all these good teams and give it to us on the road. I think Dan Campbell, his whole mindset is like this 17 game season is for us to get ready to win in the playoffs. And if he can, and if the team like looks good by the time that they do get into the playoffs, he doesn't care how it looks like. And I think to him, like he looks at the schedule, he's like, this is awesome, man. We're going to get a ton of good work out there. And I think that's the mindset to have. One thing that I said kind of towards the end of last year, where they were just continuing to win games despite the litany of injuries, I think his defining trait is that he refuses to be a victim. And I think, going on the road last year and being 8-0 on the road and sweeping the NFC North and maybe one of the best divisions in football history, like they love it. And that is what they live for. And I think they're like, oh, the more games like that, the merrier. But I do think they'll suffer some losses along the way. I think it'll definitely hurt the record, but I don't expect them to go, 9-8 or anything like that. Like I still think comfortably they're at least 10, but maybe 11 or 12 wins. Because when I look at those teams, like, yeah, they're tough games to play in, but if you relish the moment and then you just consider the fact that, well, at the end of the day, like, the Lions are just better than these teams. Right. I think, they're at a position where they can go out and just win all those games. And again, they were about as even as you can be with the Vikings and the Packers last year, but they just kept winning those games because they were the better team, the more composed team, the team who believed that they were going to win the most, as well as the team with just more talent on it. And I still think that is the case this year.
You bring up literally it being one of the greatest divisions of all time. They had legitimately about a 3-month stretch, about a 12-week stretch where they received no help from anybody in their division. The Vikings would not stop winning. And, it's a similar case. Now, I don't see two teams winning 14 games again, but, you're going to be playing 6 games against teams in your division. And, they're all going to be tough. I think, people are I feel like we do this every year, but I do think the Bears will take a step forward, and I think that offense will be more explosive as they, do a better job of protecting Caleb Williams. He's got some playmakers. The Packers are pretty darn consistent. The Vikings, you replace quarterbacks, but O'Connell's a tremendous head coach, and they always seem to have a pretty good system there, at least since he's been there. Who do you view as the biggest competition in this division?
Oh man, that's a good question. I like the Vikings. Like, and I think it's just because I have so much respect for Kevin O'Connell. I think, honestly, he is so close to being what Dan Campbell is as a coach, and in terms of just like super smart, but also like doesn't let that make him arrogant. It allows him to have all this room for like emotional maturity and caring about his players and like seeing eye to eye with them. On top of the fact that he is maybe like one of the biggest geniuses to come from like if he's not there already, he's well within striking distance of being like Shanahan, McVay, O'Connell. Like he is one of them. But the same goes for LaFleur. Like he comes from that same tree as well. So, it's a fascinating division. There are no like dopes in this division.
Right.
Like I think all of them are really, really good coaches. But I think something that's interesting about it when you just think like, oh yeah, on the one hand, they're due for regression. You go 6-0 in the best division in, recent football history, that, you think to yourself, there's got to be some luck to that. But you brought up, you're a Michigan fan. How many years were you like, man, at some point, like the law of averages has to say that the Michigan Wolverines are going to beat Ohio State in this, right? And then they just don't. And then just don't for 20 years. And the same thing goes with watching the Lions growing up against the Packers. And you're like, God, you look at this team, they both have good quarterbacks. They have the same record. At one point or another, the law of averages has to send a game in the Lions' direction. But that's not how sports work. And, I just wonder, do they keep that mental edge over those teams? Because it's been a long time. I mean, the Packers won in Detroit on Thanksgiving in 2023. But outside of that, I think the Lions are 6-1 in their last 7. And then against the Vikings, I don't think Kevin O'Connell has ever beaten Dan Campbell. I may need a fact check on that. But that's something I think about a lot, is like, what if this is just how it is now? You think back to that Lions-Packers game last year in Lambeau. It was the Packers dropping passes. It was the Packers taking dumb penalties. It was the Packers doing everything that I remember the Lions doing against the Packers growing up. And it's like, maybe that's just how things are going to be for the next couple of years. And maybe regression doesn't have to exist. Maybe this is just the new normal and we're all struggling to get used to it and expecting things to go back to maybe not the way they were, but things to even out a little bit. And that doesn't have to happen.
Yeah. And there's a big difference, I think, and we've dealt with this in Detroit. There's a huge difference between regression and reversal back to the way things were. Like, I don't see, and maybe this is wishful thinking, mid 90s to basically early 20s stretch of Detroit Lions football where anything that could have gone wrong will. Like, yes, they might not be 15-2 this year, but I think the culture's there, the pieces are in place. I'm with you about the Vikings. I still think, and I feel like we've said this a lot lately, I still think the Bears are probably 1 year away from truly contending. I think there's still some question marks. The Packers are an interesting one to me because I think that LaFleur does a very good job and they have a good play caller, which is a huge step in the right direction. I feel like they have almost in the last few years become the Penn State of the NFC, where it's like they win all the games they're supposed to and lose all the difficult ones. Last year they had multiple opportunities last year to either knock off the Lions or help the Lions out, and they never did. Lost to the Vikings, lost to Detroit both times. You get into the playoffs, and as weird as it sounds now, considering how they played, like, there was a time where people actually thought Philly was kind of vulnerable and didn't play their best football in that game. That was probably the weakest they played in the postseason. Love doesn't play well at all. I think that this is kind of it's an important year for them. And I do think some pressure is on. I think with Minnesota, you retain so much of what you had. You replace quarterbacks. And obviously, who knows what you're going to get with JJ, but I do think JJ is being put in a wonderful position.
That could be a positive development for them to have JJ in there. And, if he has obviously it's tough when you go into your first season, but like, I don't know, man. I like Darnold going to Minnesota last year just because of Kevin O'Connell. I'm like, he's just the whisperer. And like I said, it's not just like he's got good tactics. Like, he's got the emotional intelligence. He can talk to people. I really do think that he gets the best out of people. But yeah, man, what if Dan Campbell just owns Matt LaFleur? It's entirely possible. It happens in sports all the time.
I thought I was so smart last year for being the guy who thought Darnold was going to have a good year because of that very reason. My prediction was like he'll have the Baker Mayfield year with the Bucs. He's going to go there. He's finally under the right system. By that, I mean not playing for Carolina or the Jets, and he's actually going to ball. And then I saw like every intelligent person that I knew in media was saying the exact same thing. Not that intelligent. But no, we'll see what happens. I agree with you though about Minnesota. Last question, because I do think one of the key, winning solves everything. But really, since Campbell and Holmes arrived here, we've gotten something with the Lions organization that I would argue, even during some of their good years, never really existed, which is personality. Like, it's a fun team to cover. It's enjoyable players. It's enjoyable stories. It's a coach, a GM that are media friendly, but they're not giving away too much. I think that this is going to be, and it's going to continue to be a very fondly remembered era of Detroit Lions football. In the time in which you've been, on the beat, who's the one Lions player that you feel like is most likely to end up in media at some point after their playing career is over?
Oh, man. That's a good question, because the guys that come to mind, the first guy that comes to mind is Terry Arnold. And I think he's got all this life and energy, but like a lot of DBs do. And so it depends. It's all where he wants to put his energy after football. I could see Goff. Like, I could see Goff going into media when it's all said and done, because like I said, I do think he sees the game the right way. I also think he has like the mental, like, I think he'd be a really good media person, because he's not going to be one of those former players that like just has the kind of taste that you're like, dude, are you kidding me? Like, literally nobody can tell that you played in the league based on the way that you talk about things. And I think he brings such a measured, like, calm approach to everything, but he's also really smart. So I think he's definitely somebody that could end up there. Man, that's a good question. Maybe some of the D tackles, Ali McNeil, DJ Reader. I could see two guys who are going into media when it's all said and done. Maybe Taylor Decker. Taylor Decker's another one. Great talker, kind of one of those guys that whenever there's like an emotional moment, we go to him, because he's in a lot of ways the heartbeat of that team, and he's also just a really good talker. Off the top of my head, I'm probably missing somebody.
There's one that comes to mind for me, and we have had him on the show once. We want to try to get him on again. And I don't see him doing the traditional media route of like, he's going to be on, NBC, before the Sunday night game, breaking things down. But a guy who just as a personality, I think is one of the most entertaining in football is Kirby. I think in
Oh, yeah, for sure.
in some capacity, Kirby Joseph, whether it's podcasting, commercials, what have you, will be a mainstay in football for a long time. Though again, like I brought up, we forget how young these guys are at points. I mean, I feel like it's just getting to know them. Look, man, I mean, you picked a good time to start doing the Lions stuff for sure. You've done a wonderful job. Of course, I appreciate you bringing up the Locked On connection there. Appreciate you doing the show, man. This was really good. This is really good. I think the fans are going to be super excited about this season, as they should be. Keep doing your thing, man, and we appreciate you coming on Chris Company.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for having me. Anytime.
It was great, man. Yeah, always a lot of fun. And really, you know what's funny is I'm typically so locked into baseball season throughout the summer that, I mean, there's people, and hey, no fault of their own. It's everyone's excited about what they're excited about. There's people who on like July 4th are like, dude, I'm ready. Let's go. It's football season. And I'm like, all right, but we're in the middle of a pennant chase here. Like, I don't want to hear about football. It really was this week when I was on my walks, when I just did the air quality, it started to kind of, the humidity's going down a little bit, started to feel like football again. And I'm like, let's do it. Let's do Michigan and Michigan State Saturdays. Let's do Lions Sundays. I'm ready for it. And the guests that we've had on, whether it's Anthony Broom, Matt Sheehan, or in this case, Nolan Bianchi, only further excites me for what football will have in store. As much as I love baseball, and it is my favorite sport, football in the modern age is truly America's pastime. I would be wrong to deny that. And shout out to Nolan for jumping on the program. So that'll do it for today's episode of Chris and Company. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. We are available on TikTok, which is consistently growing. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find this podcast in audio form on Apple Podcasts. You can find it in audio form on Spotify. And of course, follow Nolan on all of his socials as he continues to do a wonderful job for the Detroit News. And CastellaniContent.com is being updated every single day with the content that Austin and I create. A full archive of every episode of I'll Say This, every episode of Chris and Company, and every Detroit Tiger postgame video, movie reviews, Michigan football, basketball stuff, whatever you want to find, it's all there. So that will do it for today's episode. Appreciate all of your continued support, and I appreciate the guests who have allowed us to be very consistent. It's been so long since we've even missed a week, and I, not to pat ourselves on the back too much, but I've got to give a shout out to Austin as well with this. For an independent show, especially an independent interview show, to be that consistent, I'm proud of that. And I hope that you guys can be proud of what we're doing too. So I will talk to you all again real soon. Thank you again to Nolan Bianchi for jumping in the show. Have a great rest of your week. Peace and happiness.
Thank you.